good afternoon, everyone. It's so good to be here, actually, in a real live person Conul event. I haven't been here in a few years, so it's great to be back. Today we're going to talk to you and introduce you to the TCD Sense project. So myself and Peter work in Trinity College Dublin, and really going to bring you back to I'm going to start by bringing you back to the early part of the research. This story goes back about 5 years, so we'll take you through the arc of that. So yeah, it's been a really fun project, and I'm sure Peter will agree with me. It keeps on giving. Let me see if I can move this forward. Okay, so just to give an overview. So I'll cover the social sustainability aspects of it and community building, how we actually embedded two engaged research projects, how Peter and I then took the findings from those various research projects and translated them into actions for the community. And then Peter will take us through the procurement side and the more environmental sustainability aspects of the project. And then also online sensory supports, and then the next steps for us. So it's really good to hear Rebecca talk about the social sustainability piece, and I guess sustainability is really about thinking about meeting the needs of the current generation without compromising the needs of future generations. And the social sustainability piece is really at the core of that is people and humans. And so these questions have been preoccupying me for a number of years around thinking through what our libraries do and what our services offer for the people part. And some of you, or even many of you, might be familiar or aware of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And it's really just a hierarchy to look at what motivates humans really in their environments and in their lives more generally. And I guess most of our libraries would reach sort of the pieces at the bottom of this triangle. I'm not sure if you can see it there, but the bottom one being, shelter, basic shelter. So we're providing a physical environment for our students and our users to come into our spaces. And we're also ensuring mostly that they're very safe spaces to be in. But as you move up the pyramid there, the piece around belonging is really important as well. And these are, I suppose, harder milestones to hit. But the sense of belonging and engendering that amongst our student and user groups is really important. And then at the very top of the pyramid, thinking through how are we actually empowering them to be independent citizens, I guess. So all of these things help structure our thinking around how to think this through. And let me just try and push this through. So introducing TCD Sense, really, it aims to make our university more inclusive by reviewing and improving new and existing spaces, building sensory awareness and providing specialist supports to students who experience barriers to managing and adapting to their sensory environments. We have been able to get this captured in our return to the Times Higher Education rankings, the impact rankings. So it's captured in that, and we worked with our research office in making sure it's in there. And obviously then it speaks very much to the UN Sustainable Development Goal number 10, which is around reducing inequality in our environments, I suppose, and in our communities. So just to take you back, so having just mentioned what TCD Sense is, we might just start by, I'll take you back briefly to the origins of the project, and sort of the research project that sort of built the foundations for it was one I was involved with, and a shout out to my colleague in the red here, some of you may know her, Geraldine Fitzgerald. There is a programme in Trinity, and it's in the Trinity Centre for People with Intellectual Disabilities. And there's a course there, a 2-year cert course in art science and inclusive applied practice. Geraldine would have worked very closely with the first cohort, the first intake of these students, and she was noticing that they weren't really coming into the library. So she would have met them early on in orientation and spoke to them and, did our usual embedded sort of training skill sessions. But she noticed they weren't engaging, so they didn't feel like they belonged in our spaces. And it was niggling away at her, and we were chatting about it and see what we could do. We spoke to the module coordinator, which is the third person on the right there, Marianne O'Donovan at the time, and we were saying, what can we do around this, And she said, why don't you just ask the students what's not working? It seems so simple. So that's where this journey started. And I guess it's really around what our now Provost, our then Dean of Research, Linda Doy, would have spoken about, and very passionate around engaged research, which is very much about working in collaboration with your users, not just for them, but with them. It's so important to do that. So that's absolutely the philosophy and mindset we enshrined in this project. So it was a proper research project in the sense that we had to go for full research ethics. These were vulnerable adults. We had to all be Garda vetted. you know, we had to make sure our ethics application was done plain English, consent forms, use of images, things like that. So it was a real learning curve for us in the library in terms of how we approached research. And even though the cohort was only 6 students in this intake, so it's a very small number of students, we did a very deep dive with them. So we did a real qualitative piece of research. It was ethnographic. We had a number of focus groups. We chatted with them. But we took a long, long time to get to know them, and that was really important. We couldn't just come in all guns blazing. This is how we've done research before. We had to really get to know the students and on a very personal level and understand where they were coming from and take it very, very slowly. And as you can tell, I'm a quick talker, so I had to really hone that in and just take it really slowly was so important for these students. But we had those focus groups and we came up with a number of findings. The second research project then, so that was working with the small group. We built up really good relationships with the OTs, the occupational therapists in the centre, and they were talking to the OTs in our sort of university disability service, and we got talking more on how these things happen. They approached us then, the disability service. They wanted to co-build an evidence base to improve the physical environment for all students who have sensory disabilities. So the students we dealt with before had intellectual disabilities, and actually a lot of them had sensory disabilities as well. What we did then was we triangulated data from our own library survey, which we call Library Life Pulse. We also worked with the disability service team. They did a sensory audit of learning spaces across the campus. One of the, it was with laboratories, lecture halls and the library as well, those 3 Ls. And then they also did a survey of their users as well. What we did then was we did a massive sort of bring all the data together. There was thousands of data points, and we looked at what we could do in the library and the disability service around an action plan or an implementation plan to address 3 challenges, and they really were noise, environment, signage and wayfinding. And that really led to the development of TCD Sense. I'll just skirt briefly through some of the findings and take us back to the students with ID. So the big things that came out for us were, you know, navigating the physical environment, library anxiety. So we know a lot of students have issues, you know, approaching our physical desks and asking for help. This particular cohort, they were really concerned about what happens if I trigger the access gates coming through, if the alarm goes off. That would be huge for them, and they'd be really overwhelmed by that. So we had to really talk them through how that works and be very mindful of that. And then the one at the end here, fear of not belonging. That came out as a huge theme for this cohort. They couldn't see themselves in the library. You know, they just didn't feel like they belonged. So a lot of these themes then, we think, it's not just for these students, they're applicable to all students. And that's why, you know, whilst we did the research with this particular cohort, we can extrapolate out to all students as well. The disability service survey, I'll just maybe call out, half of the students said they would leave campus or go home if they felt overwhelmed. So that's quite shocking that, you know, what are our library spaces overwhelming to them? And that was borne out in our own survey that we did. And I'll just read out this quote. As someone with severe social anxiety, I can't make it through to the designated disability service space without going through the intensity of the rest of the library. I'd love to know the fastest and least intrusive route to the space. Otherwise, to avoid this intensity, I use the library late at night through to the morning when no one else is around. So that really struck home with me. I thought it was very powerful that students are literally avoiding our spaces because they can't cope with what's going on around them. And there's no easy fix to this, but the research would back that up as well. The sensory audit then, the OTs and the disability service would have audited 8 library locations around campus. And again, just to call out some of the themes here, escape routes. This was all new to me. I didn't know what an escape route was, but it's essentially, like that student mentioned, running the gauntlet to get in and out of the library and the overwhelming nature of the environment to get in from A to B. We've since worked with our OT team and we've talked about, yes, we're hamstrung by the architecture of our physical environment, but what can we do around transition spaces and talking to the students around, you know, you're coming in from a very public sort of busy environment into a quiet library. Let's have this transition space, and Peter will talk through some of the interventions and the furniture we have to help students with that. Auditory hypersensitivity, everything from a squeaky wheel on a trolley to the blinds coming down, all of these things that we just weren't on our radar, but to some students can be overwhelming. Some low-hanging fruit then, and Peter will talk through some of the main things we did, but some, you know, as I say, this is stuff we could sort of react to in terms of the research. We were able to deliver sensory library tours, so what that is really you're doing one-to-one or small person tours where you bring in the students when the library is quiet and talking them through the services and facilities that are there to help them, the zones that might be quieter for them, you know, renting out the headphones, for example, from the desk, things like that. And then just to mention some of the research, I mentioned earlier the students with ID couldn't see themselves in the library. So we thought, what can we do together? And this is the co-collaboration engaged research piece. We worked together. They scripted a video around, you know, basic stuff around how to use the library. They scripted it, they starred in it, and we got in a professional videographer. We won some awards, funding from an equality award in the university. And then the real cherry on top for me, I really was so proud of the work the students had done. We co-wrote an article, and it got published in a journal called Disability and Society, and that really does, I suppose, exemplify their effort in this and what they could do. And a simple thing is just to ask them what do they need. The big then project output is TCD Sense, and so I guess just to, you know, this was coming at a time we built up this research. An opportunity came in, government funding, which Peter will mention. We were ready to go because we had the research and the data findings that would help us to actually act on our implementation plan now, because we had support to help us with that. So I'll hand over to Peter now.
Thanks, Siobhán. Okay, so this is a good segue then to I suppose, the meat of the TCD Sense project in particular. This was really a kind of a multi-spectrum project. We were looking at all of our spaces from a number of different angles, and you can see in the logo here that it's all built around the senses, and that was very much the focus. There had been a lot of interventions in Trinity across the campus to make buildings accessible, but that didn't kind of meet the bar of making them spaces that people can feel comfortable in from a sensory point of view. And through the research, which was absolutely crucial for sort of setting the stage for all of this, we just realized more and more and more the struggles, the kind of invisible struggles that people were having, particularly in a kind of bustling city centre campus, where oftentimes you've got lots of tourists around and lots of visitors just walking through the campus. The place is extremely busy. And then you've got these jolting differences between the outside environment and coming into the buildings. So, the exciting topic of procurement. This was actually crucial in this project because one of the big triggers after the research was an opportunity that arose via the HEA. So leading up to 2019, a decision was made to allow money that hadn't been spent across the university sector to be used for a number of different project areas, and one of those was for disability services. So universities were invited to pitch for projects, and Trinity put in a pitch, and we were able to get quite a significant amount of money initially. So Minister Harris at the time made the announcement that there would be 500,000 made available, of which about 250,000 ended up going on the sensory processing projects, and the greatest bulk of that money went to the library because we have the largest footprint and the largest footfall. So it made sense to focus on the library. Now, the first thing we needed to do was to take a look at the research results that Siobhán's team and the disability services and the occupational therapists in Trinity had made available, and to decide what sort of physical changes to the environment would actually make a difference. And so what we did was we designed our procurement process across a number of lots, and those lots really were around different types of furniture and spaces. So there was two kind of wings to this project. One was furniture, and one was the redevelopment of spaces within the library, and obviously how those two things interact. So you can see here on the right just some of the examples of the type of thing we were looking at. A lot of it was soft furnishings, but a lot of it was also cubicles and different clusters of furniture that would allow people to kind of escape from the environment that they were struggling with. And one of the things we also did was to look at special rooms, sensory rooms or respite rooms that would allow people, again, to escape. And those have actually proven to be very, very popular, and we're actually in the process now of developing that further, but I'll come to that in a minute. So, sustainability was obviously part of this as well, because there was a lot of furniture and a lot of redevelopment of spaces, and I just thought it would be useful, given the theme of this conference, to reflect on how difficult this is actually as an area when you're involved in a process. Now, this wasn't technically a tender process, it was a mini competition, because Trinity has a number of companies on a framework, and they pitch for individual projects, which makes things a lot easier. but we still wanted to use quite a robust process. So we did have criteria in the decision-making process around sustainability, and I just thought it'd be useful to show you to what extent they actually influence our decisions. And you can see here that the environmental characteristics were 20% of the overall weighting. So it's something to reflect on. 20% is pretty significant, but it's definitely not the most significant criterion. But it was a factor, absolutely. Now, you may not be able to see the bottom bit, but this is kind of interesting when it comes to actually thinking through what is the environmental impact of engaging in a project like this. So the two biggest factors we looked at were the percentage of product components which can be recycled at end of life, and then the other factor is how much of each product actually comes from recycled materials in the first place. That sounds easy, but actually it's incredibly difficult to parse this when you're trying to make decisions across different companies. So we tried to do as much as we could of a deep dive into the furniture that was on offer. So obviously we were looking at recycling processes, we were looking at the sustainability of how the products were being sourced, and the constituent parts and whether they were from recycled materials. And to be honest, most of the companies had very similar kind of results across the board. We also looked at the carbon footprint of the various companies. Where were they sourcing their material? What sort of transport systems did they have to rely on? Were they being independently audited? And this is quite a useful one actually, because we as librarians can't know everything about the ins and outs of the procurement process. It is handy to have organizations that can kind of have stamps of approval, although again you need to bear in mind that these things do need to be interrogated and they're quite difficult to ultimately decide. And what we also notice is that many of these companies have these marks, right? So they don't actually help you in practice to make decisions because they all meet whatever this minimum threshold is. And then you've got things like waste management strategies and fleet management and things like that. Again, from a library perspective, quite difficult to think your way through all of this. And then you've got these general standards. Now, a lot of the standards that we had in our submissions were to do with forestry standards. It's where the wooden components of the furniture were coming from. And so you had some companies saying that, after X amount of furniture is built, we plant a tree, or we ensure that the wood is accredited by some of these organizations. Again, sounds great. If you look into it a little bit more deeply, a lot of these trees that are being planted in forests that are basically monocultures. They're just the same tree over vast tracts of land, and actually environmentally that's not great because there's very little diversity within those ecological regions. It's better than not having the trees there. It's better than just landscape that has been kind of eaten away by sheep or whatever, but it's not as good as it could be if it was, for example, rewilded. So it gets very complicated very quickly when you look at these standards. Okay, so in the end, what we did do is we chose a suite of furniture that, again, would respond to the research outputs. So we have furniture mainly built around acoustic protections, but also there's a big element of the tactile in this, which came to the fore and we hadn't really considered before. Soft furnishings really do make a difference, particularly for people who struggle in these environments. So a lot of fabric materials and a lot of acoustically treated furniture. We also, in the middle there, have just recently started putting in privacy screens around the libraries. These are things that can either be borrowed or we might leave around the libraries. We're still experimenting on the best way to use it, but it allows people to basically create their own little private space in a library that would otherwise be quite open. We've also looked at cubicle configurations and installed quite a few cubicles, and these probably have proved the most popular intervention of all. We're getting constant calls now to make these bookable, which raises an interesting issue because we wanted this project to be based on the principle of universality. This was for everybody. However, the people who really need these pieces of furniture are competing with people who need them less, and that creates a practical issue. We are looking at various ways of handling that through booking systems, but it is tricky, and I thought it'd be worth flagging that. Yeah, I see. Okay, so here's just some pictures of the furniture, again, in situ that we used. Again, very popular here with the cubicles. And then just quickly to mention next, because it's an important part of the project, is the online sensory supports. Again, out of the research, students who struggle with sensory environments want to be able to get a sense of what they're about to get into when they come to a library. They like to go online and they like to have quite a comprehensive overview of what they can expect. So we put a lot of effort actually into providing online supports. We developed a Linktree website, which is just basically a website that is a portal to various useful resources. We designed a campus map, which had the sensory environment described. Unfortunately, I don't have the kit here to show you that, but I'm happy to show people afterwards if they want. So it's literally what sounds, sights, smells, what tactile sensations you're likely to experience across different parts of the campus. We also, we had developed 3D maps ourselves in the library, and we were able to embed information about the sensory furniture on these maps, which again proved very successful. And that's an ongoing project, and one that we might try to roll out across the campus if possible. So then quickly, just in terms of next steps, we are still developing spaces. We're still purchasing furniture. We've just gone through another round of procurement. And one of the latest things we're looking at now are glassed-in acoustic booths that people can book and use. It's quite a tall order here because you have to make them accessible, and that actually makes things quite challenging. So things like no lips on the bottom for anyone who might be coming in with a wheelchair, enough space to be able to turn around, a desk that's high enough, built-in lighting that can be on dimmer switches, etc., to be so you can control the environment. So we're trying to kind of go all out to create bespoke spaces that really will meet the broadest possible range of sensory requirements. Okay, and then the final big next step is signage. We have got to do a big job of work on signage in our buildings. And as Siobhán mentioned a while ago, that is tricky for us because quite a few of our buildings are old and protected, heritage structures. But we are working on that right now, and the principle we want to kind of manifest here is really around intuitive design. You know, work with the structure of the buildings and try to help people understand how to get around the buildings, but also, as Siobhán said, how to get out of the buildings if they need to. So we have to bear that in mind as well. Okay, thank you very much.